Hello, all. It's 5, but we're going to give it just another minute or two to get set up and let some more people trickle in. So you're set up. Good. I see the slide. Oh, that's
That is the benefit of being on the same time zone. That I can do it. Like, oh, my calendar is completely blocked. No one other than people here. But
Dan, are you ready to go, Dan?
are you ready to go?
After we do our spiel, you're like the guy.
Mr. Pauly, since you're standing, could you close the door in the back, please? Thank you. Oh, make him do it. Ben, close the door.
All right. Well, to the chairs for the first time in ADD, we have both Tommies in the same room.
I'll look at your agenda again.
He's the only one on the agenda.
We are.
All right, everyone. Welcome to ADD at IETF117. We are the last session before the social. So ask your questions carefully. This meeting is being recorded. This is, of course, an IETF meeting, so note well does apply. Please familiarize yourself with it. It's being recorded. And I did steal a slide from 116, so face masks are not required. I'm Glenn Dean. I'm one of your co-chairs. This is David Lawrence, my other co-chair. Eric, would you like to say hello? You are our esteemed area director. And we have a very short agenda for today. Can you read that? Oh, good. We have the first thing I have to do. We've got the agenda all set up. We've got the welcome for the chairs doing, and we have the scribe all set up to go, so we don't have to beg for a scribe today. Thank you, scribes. That's awesome. Tim and Ed are going to do it. Okay, and then I just discovered, I was just informed, there are 2 working group last calls that I put into the data tracker, and I thought the data tracker then sent an automatic message to the list. It didn't. So we will be extending these calls by 2 weeks. I will get that sent out to the list, and I will learn how to use the tool apparently, because I was pretty sure it sent a note to the list when you moved it to the working group last call state. But we'll get that fixed. So just add 2 weeks on to August 3rd, and that's when we'll close both those calls. We have a very short agenda today, so we have one draft to be presented by Dan Wing, on the delegated credentials to host encrypted DNS forwarders on CPEs. We need to work on the shortening of these titles. They're getting too long. All right, Dan, come on up.
Does that work?
Let's try it again. You don't have to. Got the thing. Slides. Do I have to unshare? Okay. And then reshare.
All right. I'm Dan Wing, and this is delegated credentials to host encrypted DNS forwarders on CPE. Next slide. So what we're trying to do is get local CPE to support encrypted DNS, so that we can get all the usual features out of a localized DNS resolution on the local network. But we run into a couple of problems trying to do this. And those are at the bottom. One is the CA signed certificates, difficult to get. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail on another slide. And yeah, let's move on to another slide. That sounds good. So DDR and DNR are nice approaches. A problem with DDR, though, is the ISP's propensity to change IP addresses and rotate IP addresses means once we get one that is signed, it may change. We don't know when that's going to occur. And when it does occur, when we do get the public IP address changed, we need to go off and fetch a new certificate. And during that time, we can't offer encrypted DNS to the local network, which kind of blows. We also, of course, can't get a signature for a 192 private address. The same problem with V6. DNR works with FQDN, which is cool. We can go get names, and the ISP, managed CPE operator, could have serial numbers or account numbers or something and generate unique FQDNs for each one of their CPE. And that works all right. But in deployment, it was found with Let's Encrypt that they don't like serving out that many FQDNs, signing that many FQDNs in a one fell swoop. And then renewing them comes up with a similar sort of problem. So this is where we poked around at how else we might solve this other than talking to a CA for every single CPE. Next slide. Yeah, and then the last problem that I didn't talk about yet, which is that the CPE are often unavailable and unplugged. Kind of a small problem because once they're plugged in, they can go and get, go and talk to DNS, talk to a CA, or talk to the CPE management system and get some things. But it is a problem and delays providing that encrypted DNS. Next slide, please. So the two mechanisms we investigated for this, and we chose subcerts because of the pros and cons that it has, are subcerts and name constraints. So name constraints has been around for a long while, requires CA support, but there's very few CAs that support it, and not a lot of implementations that we were able to find. Subcerts on the left doesn't require CA support, which is nice. There's a small change to the TLS client and server that are needed. They have to send a new TLS extension. But what's nice is that's out of the cryptography necessary for TLS. So it's just in, it's in the handshake and not in a scary part of modifying TLS. And there is some client support. So Firefox supports this today. And I saw that the Facebook homepage supports it as well. So kind of cool. There is existing implementation experience with it, not in exactly where we need it, of course, but there's some implementation experience, better than nothing. Next slide, please. So this is the high level view of how this would work. When the CPE is plugged in and comes up, it talks to the managed CPE service. So oftentimes the ISP that the CPE is associated with, but it doesn't need to be the ISP. It can be a separate service that, ASUS, Netgear, whatever, operate as a side effect of you purchasing an ASUS or Netgear security enabled box thing. And it talks to the managed CPE service, gets the delegated credential brought down, and this is what to the CPE, and this is what avoids having to talk to the CA. And then that is what's presented locally to the encrypted DNS client. And that means the encrypted DNS client, the blue box is everything in the home or in the managed, in the local network. It means the encrypted DNS client needs to support the delegated credential for this to work, this authentication to work. So it knows it's talking to that CPE. It validates that and then moves forward. And that's it.
Ready for questions?
I am ready for questions.
Okay, Tim, you're at the mic. I
So
don't know
Tim
who's taking
Wasinski,
notes, but you're at the mic.
what's that?
I was making a joke. I said, I don't know who's taking notes while you're at the mic.
Oh, wait, is Ben first?
No, you are. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm first. Okay. Because So I work for a U.S. cable company. They never give out FQDNs to CPEs. So it's like they'll do it for pointers, but not for. It's like, let's not talk about that. But can you run your own private CA? Because we have our own like CPE devices that we maybe build with other, vendors and stuff. And I could see us running something as sort of our own sort of custom CA to give these out, but problematic? Yes, no. I guess doing sort of internal CAs is sort of is a problem.
Yeah.
And also we're doing a lot of dual stack stuff now too. So I need to go read if that's going to affect what you guys are doing, but I don't think it will.
Right. So we don't care what's going on with the CA, which would be to the right and off of this diagram. It's out of scope because it doesn't need, we don't need any features from the CA. So if it's a private CA, that's cool. Okay.
Ben Schwartz, Meta. So I think if anybody has implemented DNR in a client today, then this draft is a non-starter. If nobody has implemented DNR in a client yet, then maybe this draft has a chance. Because if anybody has implemented DNR in a client today and hasn't also implemented support for delegated credentials, then they're going to, you have created a situation where that client walks onto your network, connects, gets a DHCP DNR or however, or RA DNR or whatever, and then attempts to connect, gets a TLS handshake failure, presumes an attack, and drops the connection, which means it has no DNS service on this network.
Agreed.
So I think that we need to sort of answer that question and decide if this is, basically we have two options if you want to be able to do this. One of them is to update DNR really fast. I guess it doesn't have an RFC number yet. Yank it back from the RFC editor and try to modify it. And the other is to define some kind of extension so that that has to be, or basically define a new DHCP code point and a new RA code point to say, like, okay, this is DNR, but it does require support for delegated credentials. So if you don't recognize it, you'll just ignore it. Because otherwise you'd have this failure case.
Yeah, I avoided talking about it in the presentation, but in the draft is a small section, which I don't like, on how to deal with exactly that problem. And it kind of hand waves, I would say, at do keyless SSL and basically some other sort of fallback mechanisms, all which kind of bring in all the problems I talked about on slide 3.
Yeah, in particular, the reason that I think this is especially important to focus on is that I don't want us to sleepwalk into the situation where this is deployed and there are, therefore situations where this incompatibility is happening. Because in that case, what we'll inevitably, I think, end up with is that the clients will have to take sort of a soft fail approach where they've used DNR, they've done the TLS handshake, they've gotten the failure, they like certificate validation failure or whatever, and then they can't afford to actually break. And so they'll have to come up with a soft failure. And if we're encouraging clients to have these very soft failure modes, then we're reducing the security that this whole system offered in the first place.
And that's a good point. There's already enough pressure for soft failures to occur.
I mean, yes, I recognize there's already a lot of pressure to make those failures soft, but let's not increase that pressure.
Agreed.
Okay, Tommy Pauly's next.
Thank you, Tommy Polyapple. I agree with the point Ben was making. I don't think we should necessarily go like pull DNR back, or that we would really require new DHCP and RA code points. My initial impression is, could we not instead here define a parameter for the SVCB parameters and make that mandatory if we think it's going to break, such that new old clients would just fail to parse it if they don't understand that there's like this thing uses delegated credentials.
You're right. The SVCB mandatory parameter saves us again.
Yes. Woo! Good design on that thing. So that was one comment. And then just around the document itself, it's not just reading through it, scanning through it. it's not clear to me which part of this, as it's defined as like a standards track thing, like is the normative spec here. Like it talks about, there's DDR and DNR, it talks about delegated credentials. But as far as putting them together, I couldn't find so to clarify, this only works for DNR.
Yes, this will only work for DNR.
Okay. So I think it'd be good to
Okay.
spell that out. I don't know a ton. I haven't looked into the delegated credentials much in detail, but I'm assuming there's nothing we could do to have it kind of dynamically include coverage of the IP that it has so that DDR would work.
We probably, I don't know. I have to look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I would be curious. I mean, DDR does leave it somewhat open to say that you have to verify the IP address. One way to do that is to verify the IP in this part of the cert, but you could have other mechanisms to do that. So it would be interesting to see if we could have something that we're able to sign in here to say that, yes, at this moment, the IP address you're getting is also somehow fine.
Okay.
I don't know.
And Eric, you're next. Before you do that, I will ask you to please refrain from high-fiving. This is a very serious working group, sir. And I saw that high five you guys did back there.
Since Tommy raised already addressed one of the things I was going to raise, I think there's a need for this. I will also say if we can find a way to to deal with the IP address cert case here for the other mode, that would be nice. Just because in starting the starting to play with this on that side, that's also turning out to be as painful or more painful than we already expected it to be, and that it was already painful, and it's gonna be a problem. But for the CPE case, I'm wondering if this is one where it's worth also thinking at a bigger picture of whether there's a better, a more general solution for this, because I think this is one that I keep seeing over and over again. Is whenever people want to run kind of trust or TLS within kind of their home network environment, we don't have a good solution there, and having a kind of, we can one-off it here to get something out, but there's still going to be a lot of other cases where it would be nice to not have to keep coming up with one-off solutions.
I think about that every time I connect to my stupid printer and my stupid NAS and my stupid 192.168.1.1 router, and I get a certificate challenge. And yeah, that'd be awesome.
And it's kind of clearly outside of it's like as far outside the charter of ADD as you can get, but it would be also nice if if there's interest, if we could kind of figure out how to pull some people together to find a solution for this that wasn't just specific to this particular use case.
I would love to work on that. That would be awesome. And maybe this is a step.
Ben Schwartz, Meta. I want to second that. As an example, we just mentioned that maybe you need a new mandatory service bindings parameter. That probably is a totally general purpose parameter. It's not DNR configuration. It's like delegated credentials required that could be applied anywhere, even on the web. And the flip side of that is that the reason those cases have proven so hard is because it's very difficult to reason about the security properties of a certificate whose private key is 2 feet from the client, with whom you have, ideally a good trust relationship. Ideally, they are the relying party, but also they could be the attacker, right? So if you put one of these delegated credentials onto a box in my house, then I can probably extract that delegated credential and and now impersonate this thing, and who knows, what kind of interesting situations that creates, right? So it's, in a sense, it begins to look like an abuse of the CA system, or an abuse of the PKI, and I'm not saying that's a showstopper, but I'd like to see some very thoughtful analysis and some broader security expertise on that question.
Okay. Cool.
for people who saw me in the queue briefly, it was because our AD visibly blanched at the idea that DNR would be pulled back. I will note, however, he did not nod his head in disagreement vigorously, so it was still a possibility. I'm glad you came up with an alternative approach, though.
Okay, any other questions for Dan on the draft? Okay, thanks, Dan.
Thanks.
Well, that is our agenda for today. We did have a few minutes. If anybody wanted any general discussion they wanted to bring up to the microphone about the working group or anything else that's going on in ADD. Going once. Are you coming up, Tommy?
Yeah. My thing disconnected. So I'm not going to actually get in queue. Tommy, Polly, Apple. Since, Ben was raising the question about implementation for DNR. So, DDR, I think people have implemented in that, and there's a bunch of resolvers supporting that. On the DNR side, that's something that we do not yet have deployed on our platforms. I'm not aware of any other clients that are currently running that in production. And I'm also curious about routers that are actually supporting that. So it would be good to have some conversation with the people here about like intent to implement and interop testing. It's been difficult so far for me to find like, okay, there's something off the shelf I can easily test with to say, yes, iOS and macOS are going to work with this. And I don't want to ship it untested. So can we bootstrap something like that to make sure that as we are shipping the spec for DNR, that we actually are making sure it's being used and implemented in the ecosystem?
So to clarify, are you suggesting something near term or something like a hackathon thing in Prague?
Yeah, it could be a hackathon in Prague. That would be a fantastic thing to kick off and just say, hey, everyone, like, let's actually make this happen. Or if there are people already who have that and are willing to make boxes available, that'd be great. It is certainly trickier to test DNR without kind of all the parties getting together, as opposed to DDR. Once Quad 8 and Quad 1 did it, it's easy to just configure yourself to hit those and test it out end to end.
If I can make a suggestion, I mean, implementation is a little bit outside the scope of the working group, but not entirely.
A lot of working groups
Yep.
help foster the hackathon work. Yeah.
So I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
I was also going to suggest that maybe if you want to kick off a note to the EDDI list, EDDI, because it is the encrypted DNS deployment initiative, and
Sure.
hackathon and plug-a-thon testing might be a really good thing for that that community, and it gets a bigger community than the people
Right.
that are doing the spec development in this room.
Yeah. I guess, I mean, as a question to the people in this room, is there anyone who would participate in a hackathon for that we know of here?
And Ben already conveniently ran out the back of the door. He's gone.
So MeTaker's not letting me in, but do you want to go to Andrew first, or because I was going to respond on the question Tommy asked, but
well, while Andrew's coming up, why don't you go and then
okay. So it's
and then
Chris
Andrew
Box
can
from
come.
BT. In my perspective, DNR is a very interesting technology. At the back of my mind, I have intention to build a deployment just to prove the technology, because it does have a number of challenges, and as has been discussed about how do we do that. So I have a plan. Don't yet know when I can give you something to use, but the intention is there.
Okay, Andrew.
Hi, Andrew Camping. Answering the question that Tommy just asked, is anyone implementing it? I don't think anyone's in the room from ISC, but I think they've. No, I thought that there's now support in ISC, and so I thought there was now, as of this month, support in ISC, and I thought also maybe DNS dist as well. but I couldn't see Vittorio to ask him. For DNR.
For the DCPNRA option.
I thought there was an announcement earlier this month of support, but I could be wrong. So it might be a little bit.
Okay.
All right. What I'm hearing is that we need some discussion on lists, and I'm going to suggest we blast into both lists because it'll get a broader audience of people that might be able to stand up and say, "I've got implementation that's running." EDDI and the ADD list, because there is a lot of overlap between those two, but they're not identical. Okay. Any other topics people want to bring up? Going once, going twice. Thank you for your time and your attention to ADD. We'll see you in Prague.
Yeah, and just to remind you real quickly, the 2 last calls that have been active for a few weeks that will now be officially active by going to the list, and so they'll be up for about 2 weeks. So be on the lookout for that, and please send feedback. Thank you.
If people aren't going to have it for Prague, it doesn't make sense. Your agenda is these Japanese.
I didn't read this list of DXP options on top.